Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here. I'm not wearing any pants, and it's time for a review of this new Don Diablo album, Future. Don Diablo is a Dutch DJ and producer who's actually been making music since 1997, which was the year I was born. Good God! Although, rather sadly, Diablo really only started picking up steam in 2013 or 2014, and mostly thanks to his contributions to the future house scene. My first experience, personally, with Don Diablo's music was in 2013 when the Swedish House Mafia premiered his song Starlight, Could You Be Mine, his collaboration with Matt Nash at their last show at Ultra Music Festival. I wasn't actually there, but I did watch the live stream, so I guess that counts for something. I personally had Starlight in pretty heavy rotation back when it came out in 2013, but I can also comfortably say that's because I didn't really listen to that wide of an array of electronic dance music. The song was at least kind of unique for its time. I mean, I don't think I've ever really heard another instance in an electro house track where a vocoder is used so heavily, so I suppose it's pretty unique, but it also wasn't really necessarily anything groundbreaking. So I guess it really came to my surprise when Don Diablo seemed to be getting more and more popular with every passing month. Now, I've enjoyed my fair share of Don Diablo future house tunes. Nighttime especially used to be a big jam of mine, but I didn't really see Don Diablo as one of the people who really shaped the future house scene, more as just the person who kind of rode the wave for as long as he could. He was no Oliver Heldens or Chami. While those two producers respectively kind of moved into a more underground sound with time as future house was getting more popular, Don Diablo really rode that wave and kind of blended elements of pop into his music a bit. And frankly, beyond Diablo's remix of Secrets by Tiesto and Kashmir in 2015, I really have had no interest in what he's done. And that's not to say that I thought his music was particularly that bad, it's just that there were other kinds of EDM genres that were on the rise that I thought were more interesting, and his music was honestly getting pretty redundant. Needless to say, I kind of threw Don in the back seat for a really long time. That is until you guys kind of rather suddenly started requesting that I review his music. Being that I did have some really good memories with Don Diablo's music, I was really excited to see what he could throw together with the first album he's put out since his rise to popularity. And I honestly didn't have many presuppositions going into this album. Being that it's called Future, I kind of expected that it was going to have a theme centered around future house and maybe a little bit of future bass too, but that's really it. I've gotta say, Don Diablo did surprise me here, but really not in the way I had hoped he would. First of all, Don Diablo kind of screwed himself over by giving this album the super clickbaity title of Future when it is not predominantly future house or future bass for that matter. In fact, a large majority of this album's content ends up being really pop-leaning tropical house music. The absolute last thing I needed going into 2018 was yet another vocal chop heavy tropical house album. I really don't know how anyone thought I was going to really get into this album after all the flack that I gave the Aviary last year. And that's not to say that I really would have loved to see Don Diablo do a full-on future house album, because honestly I probably wouldn't have liked that much either, but this electronic dance music scene has been so saturated with tropical house and dancehall for years at this point. I would be totally okay if it was completely eradicated from the world permanently. In fact, I think the last time I was really interested in anything tropical house, it was Sieb's remix of Him for the Weekend back in 2016. Even if you take this album's title for being more of a metaphor with Don Diablo saying this is the music of the future, that doesn't really make any sense either, because there's nothing really that inventive about this album. In fact, Don Diablo's influences are pretty clear across the board. The big influences I hear coming primarily from Avicii and Sieb, although I definitely say there are influences coming from other places, you know, Kygo, maybe a little bit of Swedish House Mafia, Axwell and Grosso, and really just the tropical house scene in general. I mean, very rarely will you find a song on this album that it's like, oh wow, that's distinctly Don Diablo. In fact, if I were to listen through this album without the prior knowledge that it was a Don Diablo album, I would never have guessed that this was him. There are maybe 4 or 5 songs on this 16-track album that I'd say are dominantly led by Don Diablo's really familiar synthesizers. Higher, Head Up, Reflections, and You Can't Change Me are really the only songs on this album that to me sound distinctly Don Diablo. And don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I don't have a problem when artists try out new things, but when you try out new things, don't let it be something that's been done 1,000 times before. Especially not if your vocal top lines are going to be completely soulless and substanceless. I mean, some of the lyrics on this album are just laughable. Everybody's somebody. Nobody's nobody. Wait, are they talking about me? I don't want to completely put this album on blast my entire review. I essentially felt the same way about most of the tracks, but there were some decent ones in my opinion. I already mentioned those tracks that feature more of Don Diablo's signature elements, and I actually liked most of them, especially songs like Higher featuring Betty Who and You Can't Change Me, both of which had drops with really interesting rhythmic structures to their melodies. I also thoroughly enjoy the song Take Her Place featuring the band Arizona, who I've actually been meaning to check out for a while. Even if the song sounds like it's like a discount version of something Avicii would have put on his last album, it's still got a really nice, danceable groove that I can get down to, and when you boil it down, that's really what EDM is about. Found You, I kind of like too. I definitely think it's the more interesting of the 2 songs that feature bully songs. It kind of interestingly pays homage to some of house music's big classics, like Robin S.'s Show Me Love. It might even be slightly referencing like Don Diablo's early music back in the late 90s. People Say is another one that I find a certain degree of enjoyment in, even though it's probably my biggest guilty pleasure of the bunch. Pretty generic Future bass lead, and Page on vocals sounds like he's trying way too hard to be Sonny Wilson. But I think the chord progression on this track is honestly pretty rewarding, and I'm a sucker for that distorted bass line during the drop. Moving forward, the album's 15th track, Satellites, is pretty mental, with Don Diablo pursuing drum and bass for, I think, the first time. There were rumors that the song was supposed to be a collaboration between Don and the Monstercat native producer Faint, who I'm personally a big fan of, and although these rumors have been claimed as totally false, I can see kind of where it comes from. This song not only sounds like it could be a collaboration between Don and Faint, but legitimately sounds like it could be a Faint like solo single. Like, if this song wasn't co-produced by Faint, it was definitely heavily inspired by him. That's all I'm saying. Future's final song, Echoes, I will admit makes a really nice closer to this album. It's kind of a more ambient track that uses some vocoder elements, a little bit of soft electric guitar kind of in the background. It's really light, which is always, in my opinion, a really nice way to close an EDM album, even if the song isn't super impactful or anything. I think probably the biggest reason why it's one of my favorites, though, is that it really represents what I had hoped Don Diablo would do with this album. It's using a little bit of technique that Don seems to be familiar with, but other than that, it's moving forward. And best of all, it just simply steps away from that style of tropical house that we see inundating the majority of this album. So yeah, where was I? That's like 6 out of 16 songs in this album that I found really remotely enjoyable. If I had to give a really strong generalization, I'd say Future is just a basic EDM album for basic EDM fans. Although, if you're a Don Diablo fan, really don't take that to heart. I didn't think much better of Kygo's last album, and I'm not really expecting much better out of Felix Jean's new one. I really, truly wish the mainstream EDM scene would just move on from tropical house and dancehall and maybe latch onto another kind of trend, because I'm really tired of this one. This has been happening since like Justin Bieber's album in 2015. I don't want to hear this stuff anymore. I refuse to. For Don Diablo's Future, I am feeling a strong 4 out of 10. As always, if you haven't checked out this album and you'd like to, I have the Spotify link down in the description below. And if you guys have listened to this album and you have some opinions on it, make sure to let me know what you think down in the comment section. Make sure to like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to. I always welcome some new subscribers. I'd like to have some new subscribers. What do you think about that? Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.